In the book of John in chapter 4, we have stories about Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan woman, going to Galilee, and healing the son of an official. After this, the Jews were having a festival, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, in Jerusalem, there was a sheep gate, and nearby was a pool, called in Hebrew Bethzatha, that had 5 porticos. In there were many invalids, blind, lame, paralyzed. There was a man there who had been ill for 38 years.
When Jesus saw the man lying there and knew that he had been there for a long time, he said to the man, "Sir, do you want to be made well?"
And the sick man answered him, "Jesus, sir, there's no one to put me into the pool when the water's stirred up. And if I try to make it by myself, someone always steps in front of me and I can't do it. Just make it."
Jesus answered him, "Stand up."
Stand up.
Stand up. Take your mat and walk.
At once, the man was made well, and he took his mat and walked. Now, this day was a Sabbath.
Sometimes I think, why bother? Will you please pray with me? And now may the words of my mouth, the meditations of our hearts, be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. You may have noticed, if you're friends with me on Facebook, some pictures from, well, another place in the last week. I said a minute ago I was in Lexington, Kentucky for our Disciples Home Missions board meeting. Now, as a board member, I will not be doing my duty to the general level of the church, not tell you about DHM really quickly. I've got to do that. DHM is the part of our general unit that really helps with the ministries for the local church. So we had dinner one night at a church in Lexington, and one of our board members asked the senior pastor, what kind of interaction have you had with DHM service? He's like, "Oh, I'm not really sure." It was a great time to start a story. They just called a new associate through Search and Call. If you were on the search committee that brought me here, that's part of DHM. They had just had the Kentucky Disciples Women's Retreat at that church. Disciples Women is housed within DHM. They were talking about sessions at TCU because they heard that I was from Arlington. And we said, yeah, well, Disciples Men, that's DHM. They did Children's Worship and Wonder, that's DHM. They used resources from the denomination for their children's ministries and for their youth ministries, that's DHM. We have people on staff who develop curriculum for churches going through difficult times in their congregations. When you worked with Hope Partnership, that's DHM. And so this is a part of the church that really is involved in everything we do. They give us resources and we help. So I just had to give that. Now, on to the sermon. Sorry, it's going to be longer now. So I was in Kentucky. Who's ever been to horse country before? Has anybody ever been to horse country in Kentucky? I know the three of you have. Is it not beautiful? Is it not just amazing? Now when you get into the city, there's some pretty cool stuff in Lexington. When we were there, one, there's a great restaurant if you're ever there, eat at the Village Idiot. Wonderful. But get the Brussels sprouts. The home that Mary Todd Lincoln grew up in is right there in downtown Lexington. Henry Clay's law office is right there in downtown Lexington. It's just an amazing history. But when you get outside of town, it's the horse farms. They go on for miles, and this time of year, it's just this lush green. Almost so green it's hard to imagine. And then you have these enormous barns and houses with white fences running. It's like a postcard just looking around it. But one of the things that I truly love about Kentucky, I saw them and commented on them when we were there a couple of years ago, and also commented on them when we were there today. In central Kentucky, everywhere you go, you see these rock walls. I got a picture of them for you, a couple of pictures. Can you see that? The rock wall. Jared, go ahead and go to the next picture. You see that? They literally line the highways for miles. They've been there for 200 years. There's no mortar holding them together. Skilled craftsmen, block by block, usually coming from the limestone that was found in the fields that they were clearing, built these walls. At times you can see new walls that have mortar and try to mimic that, and they just don't even compare. And at times you'll be driving along and you'll see where a tree has knocked down part of the wall and the rest has stood strong. Nothing else. Just nature is powerful enough to move these walls. They were originally brought to the United States by Irish immigrants in the 18th and 19th century. You've seen their walls in movies too. Rock walls. They're a little different. They have round rocks in Kentucky. They had flat rocks. They built them differently, but those walls are hundreds of years old with no mortar. As we were driving out to Cane Ridge, you may have seen the picture of me standing in the pulpit at Cane Ridge. Cane Ridge Meeting House is outside of Lexington. It is considered the starting point of the Second Great Awakening as Christianity spread like wildfire through the United States. It's also the starting point for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. From 1796 until 1804, the minister who preached every Sunday at Cane Ridge was Martin W. Stone, one of the founders of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, one of the founders of the whole Stone Campbell movement. So as I put on my Facebook, if you saw that a picture, this was a bucket list moment to stand in that pulpit. It was pretty cool. On our way out there, though, I was commenting on the rock walls and how amazing they were. And then our DHM president said, "You understand that most of those walls were built by slaves." The Irish immigrants came. They brought the skill that they had learned, and then they taught it to their slaves. Now, I'm not saying they're not beautiful, but that changes the way you see them. From strictly something that's a part of the landscape to something that took back-breaking labor to build. The DHM board is intentionally diverse. We're required to be because that's the way we've chosen to be, and so we've codified that. That we have demographics that we're going to meet. There has to be a certain number of men and a certain number of women. There has to be a certain number of lay people. There has to be a certain number of clergy. Right now, until, he retired this week while we were there, the National Hispanic Pastor was on the DHM board. One of my friends on the DHM board who's no longer there was a Filipino seminary student from Canada. I serve with a minister who is, okay, so part of our church's history is this thing called the Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ. It's primarily an African American church in North Carolina. I serve on the board with a woman who is the first woman to be elected and consecrated a bishop in the Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ. 150 years of history. The first one. It's impressive. I serve with a man who's been at Centennial Christian Church in St. Louis, just a couple of miles from Ferguson, Missouri. He was part of the effort during the protests. There's actually a documentary that came out, it was released Friday, made by another general unit, the National Benevolent Association, talking about, to be honest, talking about the disappointment that these disciples, pastors had with what they got from their denomination. Not just their response to what happened, but their response to these pastors who were struggling in their own congregations. It is a phenomenal board to be a part of. But as a part of this diversity, we have very difficult conversations sometimes. One of the things that I didn't mention that DHM does is we have a minister of reconciliation. We do a reconciliation offering every year. These are the anti-racism ministries of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And we have conversations. I'm part of what we call our PRAR committee, Pro-Reconciling Anti-Racism Committee. And on that committee, we read books and we do different things that, well, have difficult conversations around. It makes me think when we talk about statements like, and I've heard this, and I think it's well-meaning, we need to forget about race and gender or whatever it is that divides us and just be one people. It makes me think that that's not the solution. The solution is to have the difficult conversations around race and gender and whatever else it is that divides us. Because you see, I have a history. And my history is my story. And my story is involved with the things that I've experienced in my life. And your history is your story. And the things that you have experienced in your life. And the way that you view different things is completely and totally different than the way that I view some of those things. Even though we have a lot of similarities sitting right here, there are a lot of things that make us different. And we have to recognize those differences or we can't have a conversation. The beauty of rock walls in Kentucky is still there. But so is the sordid history that built it. And to look over one is really to deny the other either way. This morning, we heard this incredible telling of this wonderful story of a man who had sat beside a pool of water for 38 years. 38 years he'd been laying there. The modern translation for the word is Bethesda, or house of mercy. This pool was the house of mercy. I think it's quite ironic, and actually it wasn't intentional, that our largest, now it used to be our two largest, both the Navy hospital and the Army hospital, but our largest hospital treating our service members is in Bethesda, Maryland. It was actually named after the church that was there. The story was that every now and then, you didn't know exactly when it was going to happen, but every now and then, an angel descended from heaven and stirred the pools, stirred the water at Bethesda. And if you were the first there, you were suffering from, the swirling waters of Bethesda would heal you. So it's important that this is a festival time, because that means in Jerusalem, everyone was there. They had come from miles around just to get to this pool of water. Now, have you ever been in an emergency room? I used to work in an emergency room as a chaplain, and there were a lot of people who didn't need to come to the emergency room. There are a lot of people who would come in. Pardon me if you've done this. I'm not making fun of you. We had people come in with splinters. In the emergency room, next to someone who was having a heart attack. I imagine that's what the pool of Bethesda looked like on that day when Jesus walked by. That you had those who were mobile but had these things, oh, this hip, I'm going to get in that pool as soon as it starts to go, as they walk over to the steps. Or, man, this trick finger, it hurts when I do this. I'm going to go get into the pool. And over here, there's a man who would lay for 38 years. Did you know that we thought that the pool at Bethesda was just a myth until it was actually uncovered? It's actually uncovered in the shadow of the temple. 5 porticos around it. It was exactly as it's described here. It was there. Somebody sat at its side for 38 years. I love this story for a lot of reasons. It's part of my theology of mission. If you've heard me talk about that, you understand what I mean when I say this teaches us all that we can do miracles by helping people return to life like Jesus did. It's part of my understanding of who I'm called to be as a person of faith, helping someone who's been stuck for 38 years. But I also love it because when Jesus walks up, he doesn't just assume that this guy wants to get up and carry his mat and goes home. He says, do you want to be made well? Is this something that you want me to do? Too often when we help, we just do it, right? We just go out and we do it. We never ask that question. Is this what you want? We just assume it's what they need. Because, well, it's what we would want. The last day of our board meeting, we gathered for worship. You might not be surprised to hear this is our 3rd worship service. I was there Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We worshiped Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Just like we do when we gather together, we break bread and we share it. This time I guess we were challenged because we had someone come and preach. Lexington Theological Seminary is one of our disciple seminaries in Lexington, Kentucky. The current president is Sharice Gillette. And her husband is the pastor of East 2nd Street Christian Church. Has been for 19 years there in Lexington. And he came up to preach, and I got my pen and paper out because I take a lot of notes when someone else is preaching. I'm like, ooh, wow, I'm going to get some ideas. And then he started to read the scripture. I thought, oh, this is good. I'm preaching on this on Sunday. I already know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to listen to what he has to say. It was so different and so removed from what I'd spent several days working on. I was kind of lost. Part of that is, and I didn't tell you this, part of that is because Reverend Dr. Don Gillette is African American and serves an African American church. and he preached a sermon that his community needed to hear. He preached a sermon that I didn't want to hear. One of those uncomfortable sermons, right? But it made me think about all the times that we separate us versus them. Not just black and white, but in every way that we separate us versus them. Even the man laying beside the well at Bethesda. I thought about the differences as he was preaching between the community that he was going to be preaching the same sermon to on Sunday and the community that I was coming back to preach the same sermon to on Sunday. And I realized how much of my sermon had to do with us making things better for others. I thought about talking, when the man laying on the ground says, I try to get there, but every time I try to get there, someone gets in my way. And I thought, how often are we the ones who get in the way? And I thought about talking about how, look what Jesus did by telling him to just get up and go. He didn't have any questions for him other than, is this what you want? He never once looked at him and said, now that I've done this for you, you need to do this for me. As a matter of fact, the story tells us until a few verses later, the man just gets up and walks away. And later on we hear that the Pharisees came up to him and challenged him. What are you doing carrying your mat on the Sabbath? And he goes, well, that guy who healed me told me to do it. And they say, well, who is this guy? I don't know, that guy. What guy? And the scripture says that Jesus had gone and disappeared into the crowd. And so he just said, I don't know the guy. It's that guy. And the next day, he sees Jesus. And he goes up to him. And then he turns around and tells the Pharisees, that guy is the one who told me to break the law. That guy. I mean, he even turns him in. And Jesus doesn't then say, well, then get back down on your mat. He just says, go on and live your life. Too often we put circumstances on what we do. I've had so many people over the years come into a church and say, I need help, and I'll tell you what, one of these days I'm going to pay you back. There was a time when I would wait for that. And that was the reason I would give them help. You wait a long time. That's the only reason you're doing it. You might as well just stop. I realized after listening to Reverend Gillette preach his sermon that there are perspectives on Scripture that are as different as perspectives on rock walls. Their beauty is there. But the whole story can make you very uncomfortable. Yesterday I was reading an article by one of my favorite contemporary authors. Her name's Rachel Held Evans. Does anybody read Rachel Held Evans? I encourage you to research her, to read some of what she's done. Her first book was a year as, I can't remember the name of it, Julie read it, The Year of Biblical Living for a Woman. And so she went by the Old Testament as a woman and lived that way for a year and then wrote about it. It's a phenomenal book. Anyway, she was responding to an article that she had read by a woman who went to the store and ran into a friend from high school. The friend from high school was transgender. And when she knew him in high school, he was male and he had fully transitioned and was now female. And so she wrote this story. This woman that ran into her friend about her response to him. She was derided by the people in her community. Because she said this story drove me to accept her with love and grace. Rachel Held Evans picked up on something else. She goes, it was like Jesus with the woman caught in adultery. Too often, we become paternalistic and even patronizing with our faith when we tell stories of us versus them. I'm glad that this woman said that she showed grace to her friend, but the truth is, until we accept that we're the ones who need grace, we're going to stay locked in these battles of us versus them. I liked her take on this. She said, instead of the woman accepting her friend being the grace of Jesus, maybe the woman who had transitioned was the one filled with grace. What happens when we flip the story over and we turn the tables and we think of ourselves as the ones who need grace, not the ones who give grace? This us versus them mentality further drives wedges between groups of people. And it's almost always because, well, we see ourselves as the Savior. The only way to change that is to stop seeing myself as Jesus in these stories and to see myself as the person who's lying on the ground, the person who picks up the stone, the person who turns their back or changes and walks to the other side of the street, because those people deserve grace too. And I'm asking, I'm not telling you, I'm asking. I'm asking you what this story from John says to us. Does all this talk about the grace of God have anything to do with how we live our lives? How we decide our politics, or how we perceive ourselves to be members of the Church of Jesus Christ? I don't know how it is with you, but some days I'm fully aware the only way I made it to bedtime was through that grace. Not because it kept me out of dangerous situations, because it lifted me out of the dangerous situations that I put myself into, emotionally, spiritually. It's interesting that the pool in this story is literally in the shadow of the temple. And people left the temple to go to the pool because that's where they found what they needed. How many people over the years have left the temple to seek that spiritual and emotional healing elsewhere? Because we haven't been able to listen to the whole story. In John's story, really, the temple wanted nothing to do with these undeserving people. These people who lay by the pool for 38 years. How do we change that? How do we become a church that fully accepts grace? Not because it's something for somebody else, but because it's something for me. I can't wait until my next DHM meeting, because I get to go back and I get to be with my group of friends who is unlike any group of friends that I have or have ever had, and I get to hear stories that I've never heard, and I get to have conversations that are going to make me really uncomfortable. And I hope that I can bring those back, and we can have those conversations together too.